friends, I finally pulled my shit together, so we're back for another episode. Woo! Hello everyone. Sorry it has been like 4 weeks since we last talked actually. I had to take a break last week because MA was kicking my butt. Masters, it turns out, is a lot of work. Who would have guessed? Not me, apparently. Oh my god, there's a dog outside of my window. There's 2 dogs outside of my window. I wish you could see the dogs. No one came here to hear me describe dogs. But, yeah, it has been a while, and I guess I'm sorry, but also not sorry because I had to do work. And as much as I love you guys, I feel like my actual master's degree has to come first. I mean, this isn't going to get me a job, is it? I mean, it could. It's not gonna. It's not gonna. I suck at this. But anyway, I don't know what I was going to say. But anyway, I actually have no notes for today's episode because I wanted to do sort of a little rant episode. This is not YouTube. It is YouTube! Oh my god, I have completely forgotten how to actually do this. It's been 4 weeks and I am like, don't know what I'm doing. What's a podcast? I really wanted to do a little rant episode because we did a class the other week on nationalism and its relation to white supremacy and the medieval period. And of course, my love, the love of my life, in terms of medieval history, is Scandinavia. It's the Vikings. And guess what? People like to take the Vikings and make them racist for some reason, even though they weren't. And so I have no notes. I have some articles up with information on my laptop, but I'm just going to sit here and I'm just going to chat and we're just going to rant and we're just going to complain because for Viking out loud. For crying out loud. Stop using Vikings as white supremacy symbols or else I will cry. It's very annoying. So basically, if you don't know what the Vikings were, which, you know, you should if you went to primary school. That sounded mean. No, the Vikings were a group of raiders. They raided from Scandinavia and Iceland and Sweden. Scandinavia is Finland, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Iceland, Greenland. That's Scandinavia. And they kind of come from all over there. But Viking specifically means the people who did the raiding. So people like who would attack Lindisfarne, the monastery, or that time they used their Viking rowboats and like sailed up the Seine and just arrived in Paris and everybody was really scared about it, understandably. And that's kind of the image that people have of medieval Scandinavia, just completely. It's just people with horned helmets, which by the way they did not have, axes, big beards, and, you know, blonde hair, and killing a bunch of monks. And that is such a tiny little population of what medieval Scandinavia actually was like. Most people were farmers. If you didn't know, Thor, the god that people like to use as this huge example of, masculinity and he was a fertility god. He was the god of farming. He wasn't even a god of war. He was good at fighting, but he was not a god of war. He was the god of, growing some crops. That's what Thor was around for. Thor was around Thor. They were mostly farmers. Obviously, they became Christianized. Iceland became Christianized in around 1100 CE, so quite late, but Sweden, Finland, all of those areas, and Norway were sort of Christianized and made Christian long before that. Iceland was just not, because it was an island. And the fun fact about Iceland, the thing that I really like about Icelandic history, is that you can talk about the discovery, or the discovery of a new land and colonising it and all of that, and not have to feel bad about it, because there was nobody on Iceland. Nobody was living in Iceland until a bunch of Norwegians showed up. Like, no one was there. So nobody, got hurt. There wasn't any, terrible things going on to expel native or indigenous peoples, because there weren't any. And, I don't know, it's fun to talk about the origin of a nation, quote unquote, without having to be like, yeah, but they murdered a load of people, because they didn't, which is fun. And so what we call Norse paganism, which is what the sort of imagery that people use to perpetuate this kind of racism, founded on the Vikings, quote unquote. Whenever I say like nation or Viking or whatever, just imagine there's massive air quotes everywhere around this entire thing. To be honest, none of it is accurate in any way. This is just me summarising or saying what people tend to think rather than what actually happened, unless I say otherwise. So, the Norse paganism is the Nordic Scandinavian religion before Christianity. It's Odin, Thor, Loki, Tyr, Skadi, a bunch of people, a bunch of gods. I'm not going to sit here and list out all of the stories from Norse paganism, because that would take forever. And that's sort of what people think of. And people, the Marvel universe did not really help the way that people think of Norse paganism. Like, no. Just telling you right now, Odin and Loki were blood brothers, right? Right? Okay. That did not help, and sort of the fact that a lot of our records and the writings of those religions come from after the Christianization. So the prose and poetic Eddas, which is kind of the earliest recording of the stories and the tales and the myths that we have, were written in Iceland in the 12th century, I believe, after Iceland was already Christian, and they were written by a Christian guy for a Christian audience, and it is not really a true reflection of what we have and what they believed. It's the closest we're ever going to get to it, because before that all of the stories were oral tradition, like they told oral traditions in Rome. But of course, when these tales got written down by Christians, they wanted to portray these religions as bad. They wanted to show them as violent, as bloody, as weird and esoteric and kind of gross as they possibly could. So they filled it with, murder and incest and all of this stuff. And people don't realise that they should take it with a pinch of salt. They really, really should. You cannot just look at the tales that we have and be like, okay, that's what they believed 100%. Because they didn't. We'll never know, to be honest. We can make guesses, we can make educated guesses, but we'll never know for sure what the Nordic people believed before Christianization. I'm trying to do my dissertation on that, which is a nightmare, to be honest. But So you've got to take that with a pinch of salt. But here's the thing. 1, racists are idiots. 2, they don't care about historical accuracy. So they just completely brush over all of the facts that 1, this is not the 100% accurate recording of a tradition, and 2, that their interpretation of the recording is wrong. So if you think, to go back to Thor again, if you think, oh, he's this war-hungry, symbol of male power, he's this huge man and manly, and I don't know what else to describe him, he's like the image of the Vikings that we have, and this is what you should model, this is what men should model themselves after. They seem to forget a lot of things. 1, the fact that he was a farmer, god of farming, not war, remember that. And 2, there is a tale. There is a tale where Thor, the pinnacle of masculinity, quote unquote, wears a dress. And people just don't get that. People just so confused by that. So, I can't remember which one it is. Basically, one of the frost giants, who are, I'm not explaining Norse cosmology, that's going to take forever. Basically, there are frost giants, and they're icy, or whatever. And one of the frost giants steals Mjolnir, Thor's hammer, and Thor sends Loki to go find out who has it, what's going on. Loki finds that it's in the hands of this frost giant called Thrym. Thrym says, oh, I will give back the hammer if you let me marry Freya, who is the goddess of, I believe she's the goddess of war. She's the one with the cool cat-drawn chariot and the feather cloak that makes her fly. It's cool. And so the gods sit down and they have a conversation. And they go, oh, how are we going to get the hammer back? What are we going to do? We can't let Freya marry a frost giant. Oh no. They're frost giants and we're gods. And then, so Heimdall, who obviously is the one who watches the Rainbow Bridge, which is the way the gods travel across the universe, says, hey, what if we put Thor in a big wedding dress and a veil and let him pretend to be Freya, and then he can just nick his hammer back? And he does. What? You would not think. You would absolutely not think, from the way that people talk about Thor, from the way that people talk about Vikings, that one of the most popular gods that they had was 1, a fertility god, 2, willing to wear female clothing. Nobody would have guessed that. And he's not the only one. So in the poem Lokasena, Loki is teasing all of the gods with stuff that's true. It's very important, stuff that they've done. He's making fun of them. And in one of the versions, one of the medieval versions, can't remember which one, Loki teases Odin for 1, wearing female dress and having a male lover. And this is Odin. This is top guy. This is the All-Father, the guy who created the universe, along with his brothers, and a cow for some reason in space. Makes no sense. The Norse religion was really weird, let's be honest. And he, Odin, big man in charge, wore dresses, had a male lover. Great. How do people misread that? Either you're an idiot or you're a double idiot. And it annoys me. It very much annoys me. That, like, if you're going to use something, if you're going to kind of appropriate something, historical period, historical imagery, to, you know, perpetuate this sort of like racism, this sexism, this horrific stuff, you know, like, at least do it right. Like, I'd respect you a little bit more. Like, I'm not gonna like you, but I'd at least be like, oh, well, you know, integrity. Like, do they not? Ugh. Me asking if racists have integrity is probably the weirdest thing I'm going to do in a week. Because, of course they do not have integrity. They are terrible people. Terrible people. Surprise. Who would have known that racists were bad? But like, it's gotten to the point where you can't wear charms of Thor's hammer, because that's sort of a symbol that white supremacists use a lot. One of the runes, I believe it's Athala, the rune that got appropriated, it's now technically listed as a hate symbol. There's this movement called the Odinists, which, if you see that word run, if you see the word Odinist or Wodenist, which is what old Germanic people used to call Odin, just run, because that is not anyone who's like interested in history. That's a Nazi. Like, I once said, saying you like Scandinavian history and Norse history in public is like playing Russian roulette where the bullet is Nazis. Because you can't know. It's so hard to figure out, oh, are you interested in the history, or do I need to run away? And sometimes you really do have to be overcautious. And that fucks me off so hard. I'm actually getting heated. I'm alone in a house and I'm like, I'm gonna personally fist fight racists in a Tesco's parking lot. Tesco's parking lot? I'm not American. Parking lot. Car park. And that's just the mix of religion, of the religion that they mess up. Of course, you get the fun thing, oh, the Nordic peoples were, you know, the pure white race, you know, all of that stuff. But they weren't. They really weren't. There are so many accounts, so much evidence that there was more. What am I saying? I am so sorry. Today is a weird day. Can't remember what I was. Oh my god, it is completely gone. It's just gone. Oh, right, yes, sorry. Why is anybody still here? Is anybody still here? But anyway, how many times can I say this? But anyway, there is so much evidence that even Viking war bands, like the Raiders, were not this exclusive ethnic group. There's evidence of marriages and sharing and immigration and trading and exploration across Europe, across everywhere basically that the Vikings touched, everywhere. It is not this exclusive group, it is not black and white, it was not at all. This is a pure racial group, because it wasn't. There was so so much stuff just explaining the kind of cultural and ethnic diversity of Scandinavia during the Viking Age. There's so much. It is not at all this group that people think it is. So, for example, there's this thing called the Galloway Hoard, right? And I believe that was in Scotland. And they found it. And everyone was like, okay, what's in this grave? What's in this thing? What's in this hoard? Turns out not only were there items from Scandinavia, Britain, and Ireland, there was also stuff from all over continental Europe, Turkey, the edges of Russia. There's other evidence that the Scandinavian and Arabic worlds in the medieval period were very closely related. There was a lot of trade going on between those groups. So much trade. There's so much trade everywhere, but cultural, literal, economic. Everybody was having a fun time because they were not, the people that we know as Vikings did not see themselves as this singular group. For example, they came from many countries. We say Scandinavia because it's easy, because their cultures and religions and their languages are all related, but they were not the same. Absolutely not the same. So medieval Iceland was very different from medieval Norway, and that was very different from medieval Sweden, medieval Finland, and Greenland, and all of that stuff. It was completely different. I mean, not completely. There were similarities, or else it wouldn't make sense to group them together. And that means that the Vikings were not from one culture. They were from multiple cultures and multiple nationalities, and some of the Vikings were Christian in the early years, some of them were still pagans, some of them were a weird mix between the two. That happened in places. Iceland, for a while, had it legal to worship in a Christian way and worship in a pagan way, and so people were a weird mix of both. They came from different religions, different nations, different cultures, different groups, and above all that, the Vikings were such a tiny amount of what Scandinavia actually was. The entirety of medieval Scandinavia did not just get on a boat, fuck off to, England and Scottish monasteries, steal a bunch of stuff and go back. No, that does not make sense. It was tiny groups that would go sometimes by the orders of whoever was in charge, sometimes with the permission, sometimes just because they wanted to, and the rest of the people were just having a fun old time, being a community, being farmers, being traders, being all of this stuff. Fun stuff. And you cannot just go, Viking culture is the pinnacle of human culture, because Viking culture is not even a culture. Viking is an action. So Viking, it technically means raiders, but, and I cannot remember who, there was this scholar, I believe it was a woman, I can't remember her name, and she explained how Viking was used as a verb. So to Viking, you you aren't a Viking. You do Viking. You do raiding. You know, are a raider, if that makes sense. And so, this idea that our racial or cultural identity should be based on Viking culture makes no sense. For many reasons, but also because Viking is not an identity, it's an action. And you cannot define a cultural or racial identity by action or what they do. That just does not make any sense. And people forget that. One, it's a new study, so I can't really be like, oh, why didn't you know that, 40 years ago? Why didn't they know this 40 years ago? Oh my god. But, you cannot be like, you just can't. It makes no sense. And I am about to flip my lid at the internet all of the time. All of the absolute time. And the thing is, it's not like this is new. It's not. It's not. This whole, Germanic kind of Scandinavian master race. That's Nazi ideology. Genuinely. Not neo-Nazi, this was the 1930s. There is a Swedish symbol from World War II of Nazi supporters in Sweden, where they made a swastika out of images from Norse paganism. So it was a swastika, and they'd filled it with pictures of Thor, or Mjolnir, or Odin, or the ravens. So, it's not new. And I will not be the first person to say this, and I'm not the last person to say this. Definitely not. And it is so pervasive. It is so pervasive. At this point, there is very little you can do. Because I am imagining that even if on the off chance some racist asshole stumbles onto this episode, don't know how or why you would get here, and they hear this, they're not going to listen. They don't care. They don't care about actual historical accuracy. They don't care about actual science or evidence. So no matter what I say, if anything, I'm just preaching to the choir. I'm sitting in a room ranting to myself, which is literally what I'm doing. Because nobody who believes this stuff has ever listened to a historian. None of them. None of them have ever listened. And I cannot imagine that I would be the one to change it. I'm gonna single-handedly end racism with one podcast episode. That's not gonna happen. But I just had to get this off my chest because it annoys me. And I might explode if I don't say it. And I feel like it's kind of my responsibility to, even if actual, racists aren't going to listen to this, or aren't going to care to listen, or aren't going to want to listen. One of the very few ways that medievalists and historians can actually fight against this is by saying, and by speaking up and calling them out on their lack of historical accuracy, and explaining why they're wrong, and making sure that even if we don't change anyone's mind who's already on the far right, we might be able to convince others who aren't there yet to take a step back and think about it. Because It's very hard to change someone's mind if they're all the way there. And I don't think you actually can. I can't imagine it actually working. But if somebody is, tiptoeing along, getting a bit too close, and then they hear a historian explaining why this ideology, why this rhetoric, why this propaganda basically is wrong, why it's incorrect, why it doesn't work, maybe it'll stop someone else from becoming a far-right asshole. I don't know. So, kind of if you do see someone, basically if you see someone using this kind of rhetoric, if you feel safe enough, you are in a safe situation, call them out. If you feel confident to, if you want to, if you're in a space or a place that you will not be in danger or endangering others, or emotionally or physically or whatever, call them out. My preferred way is on the internet. Get into arguing matches on the internet. No. Because in person you are putting yourself at a lot of risk. It's very brave, and if you are strong enough to, then go ahead, but just make sure you're okay. Make sure you stay safe. Don't put yourself in danger. And that's why I use the internet, because I can just log off. I can just tell them to fuck off and block them and close my laptop. Can't really do that in public. But I sort of... Well, I've explained why I wanted to talk about this a lot of times. But another reason is that I want everybody to understand and to be able to recognise the kind of dog whistles that are used now. If you're doing research, if you're trying to find anything, if you're trying to find anything historical to avoid, to look at, to run away from, Odin, Nist, Thor's hammer, sadly, which, if anything, it was a beautiful symbol in Norse pagan traditions. In actual pre-Christian Scandinavia, Thor's hammer was this incredible symbol of fertility and growth and prosperity, and now it's just ruined. So be wary of people wearing Thor's hammer as a necklace or as a charm or as a tattoo. There's always the possibility they could just be Norse pagans, because those do exist still, but it's better to be safer than sorry. Also, when I say Thor's hammer, not like the MCU hammer, if someone's wearing like a necklace of Thor's, like Chris Hemsworth hammer, that's fine. They're just a nerd. I say that like I'm not a nerd. But, the kind of, looks a little bit like an anvil. It's really weird. I can't describe it. It's an anvil, almost. If you see the Athala rune or Viking runes tattooed on people, try and avoid it. If you think it might be what it is, I believe it's specifically the Athala rune that is used as sort of a placeholder for a swastika, and that's what that one is it's kind of like the squarish O with straight lines and then a cross tail. So it's, just Google it, find an image. I cannot describe it verbally, so try and find that, avoid that, be careful on the internet, be careful in person, and try, when you are in a safe place, when you are not putting yourself at risk, to speak up against this stuff, or to, if someone is asking questions about this kind of stuff, explain it to them, find the evidence, find all of this information about Viking history, let them know that Thor and Odin wore dresses, let them know that it was a custom for, if a woman divorced a man in Scandinavia, he was shamed, and if he tried to fight it, she could hang his balls on her door, and he was the one who was punished for being weak and being not good enough for her. It was not the other way around, that women learnt to read, that people learnt to read, that there was so much cultural exchange and information exchange between not only different areas of Europe, but also with Russia, with Islam, with loads of people, with so many things, that it is not a monolith. It is not something that you can just look at and say, oh, this is one group. Explain this if you can. Try and fight against this sort of appropriation. It really is. It's a history that has been tainted, almost. So tainted with propaganda, with racism. There is literally barely anything that you can do anymore. You cannot just go onto the internet and search up this history willy-nilly, because you will occasionally stumble across this stuff. Stumble across ableism and racism and sexism and white supremacy and all of this stuff. So you do have to be careful when you're searching it. So do try and search it. Do try and do your own research. Find out as much as you can so you are equipped to talk about this stuff, but also be careful. And if you take anything away from this episode, I guess it's that. It's just be careful. Remember that as much as we want the world to be a lovely place, and I wish it was, it's not. It is not a completely wonderful place, and history is not a completely wonderful place. And even if you do find information from historians, there's no guarantee that those historians aren't incredibly racist. So you have to read stuff critically, you have to look for stuff critically and examine your sources, question your sources. Be careful with what you use, what you read, and then also be careful with who you interact with when you're learning about this stuff, who you talk to, and be aware that as much as it is so fun to study this history, and I adore Scandinavian history, I really do, it is, in its truth, gorgeous. But, as we know, people have ruined it. People have been trying to ruin it, and there's only so much you can do to protect yourself from that. If you want to study it, you've got to be aware that this stuff is going to happen, that you are going to come across this stuff. It has happened to me. I've been doing research, and I've been on a website looking at information about Norse pagan beliefs, and 10 minutes later I've realised it's a neo-Nazi page, and I don't know how it took me that long, but it's because they're clever. It's because they're very clever at hiding. That's why it took me so long. You've got to be careful. Yeah. Just be careful. And fuck racism, I guess. I guess, all my guesses, but I don't know how to end this now, because I feel like I've got myself really worked up. I'm like raring to go, but this is like 40 minutes into the recording at this point. I'm like, no one wants to hear me just go fra for 10 hours, which is what's gonna happen, because I don't have anything else to say other than I hate this. And I hate that I have to make this, I hate that I have to say this, but what am I gonna do? I'm gonna make this episode, and then I'm gonna probably get a cup of tea because I need it. Because I've been thinking about things that I do not want to think about. Oh God. And now I actually have to do other things with my day. I can't just sit here and be mad for 10 hours. I have other things to do, and I don't want to do them anymore. I'm like vibrating. I'm like, Urgh. But yeah. I know this episode has not been very heavy with information. And if you came here to learn, you're not here to learn anyway. This is my podcast. This is only a flesh wound. This is not a history. I call it a history podcast. It's not. It's just me yelling. And vaguely, sometimes you learn things. Oh my God, it's my degree. Oh God, I just called myself out. But yeah, that's episode, I don't even know what number episode this is. Could not tell you. If you enjoyed, please like the video or subscribe, and subscribe actually, preferably, so you do not miss our next episode. We are fortnightly, unless I'm an idiot and have to do work like last time. Follow us on Twitter @fleshwoundpod. Email us if you want to chat shit at onlyafleshwoundpodcast@gmail.com. I didn't even introduce myself at the beginning of this episode. I'm Amy. And I like to party. Oh my God, I hate myself. I absolutely hate that I just said that.